Good day, and welcome to Lesson 5 in our study of the book of Daniel. Today we're in verses 14 down through to 31, and this primarily concerns Daniel himself, whereas the first part of this chapter primarily was in reference to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now it's important to realize when we go through this and understand that the two basic principles of this book are to illustrate God's sovereignty and man's obedience. And it's also important to realize this is not just a fact about historical times and places. It's also a spiritual battle between the gods of Babylon and the God of Israel. So let's look at Daniel as we go through this part of the chapter 2. And I'm not going to read this because it's rather a lengthy section. But look at Daniel and consider the person of who Daniel was. He was a young man, probably in his late teens, at the very most early 20s, who was taken away from his country in Judah and marched along with other captives to Babylon. This would be about a 4-month march to go from Jerusalem to Babylon itself. And look at the attitude and the demeanor in which he did this. Now, many people would become very bitter and angry and lash out and despondent over what had happened to him, because he must have had dreams and plans and programs for what he would do with his life. He was a member of nobility or of a wealthy family, so he would have had ideals and dreams and plans for what he wanted to do. This was all taken away from him. He didn't really know what had happened to his hometown of Jerusalem. He was taken along with other people captive to Babylon, and there he would serve the rest of his life. But instead of being bitter, instead of being despondent, instead of being downcast, he seemed to accept it with a type of attitude, which meant he was going to make the best of this, because he felt, and it was probably true, that God had put him in that position for that particular time. In the book of Esther, chapter 4:14, it says, "Who knew but that you have come to this kingdom for such a time as this?" And this probably is the same application to Daniel and his duty here. Because he became involved in the Babylonian culture, he became involved with the Babylonian language, he became involved with all of the knowledge that the Babylonians had. Even though he became involved in this and enmeshed in the culture and enmeshed in the kingdom of Babylon, he did not lose his roots. He did not lose his faith in the Jewish God or in his own upbringing. This indicates very clearly that even though we are not really supposed to be in the world, we can still become enmeshed in the culture of the world without becoming embroiled in it, or becoming encapsulated by it, or becoming enmeshed in it ourselves. We can learn it, we can study it, we can be involved without becoming indoctrinated by it. And this is what Daniel did. So he did this in a very great attitude, in a very good attitude. He learned all of the things of the Babylonian culture that he was required to learn, that the king wanted these young men to do, and he did it in a way in which he won the respect and the admiration of the Babylonians. He talked to the head eunuch, and he talked to the stewards, and he won the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs, it says in chapter 1. And when they brought him the king's food to eat and to drink, he made a bargain with them to have his own vegetables and water instead for the 10-day period of time. But he did it in a way which was gracious, which was not overpowering or not demanding, and he won their approval to do this and to show them that his way was actually better, and that they actually were doing better on his diet than on the king's provisions. And then he comes again where he went to the king himself and was found to be knowledgeable. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see my decision is firm. In all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined him, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. So Daniel gained the time, and Daniel gained the king's favor, and gained the king's approval for what he had learned and what he had done. So now in the first part of chapter 2, the king had this dream, which he wanted his own astrologers, his own magicians, his own soothsayers to explain both the dream to him and its meaning. And of course, they could not do this. They could not do this because they said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. They were admitting that they had no influence, they had no insight from their gods as to what the king had dreamt, or as to what its meaning was. And the king knew this. He understood that they were all perhaps making this up. And the king was angry and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, including Daniel and his friends. So that's where we left it last time. So now the chief council, the captain of the king's guard, came to Daniel and explained this to him. And Daniel really said, what is the urgency? He again talked with some consideration and some insight into the king's guard, Azariah. He said, why is there such an urgency for this? Why is there such an urgency for the king's command to do this? He said, Arioch made the decision known to Daniel, so Daniel asked the king that he wanted time. Now Daniel, first of all, knew the king because the king had commended him on his wisdom and on his knowledge before. So it is not really unreasonable for him to have an audience with the king, even though, in all respect, to demand an audience with the king unannounced probably could have meant his death. But he was under a sentence of death anyway, so really it probably made little difference to him at the time. But he wanted an audience and got an audience with the king and said, give me a day, give me a short period of time, and I will give you your answer. So the king acquiesced again to Daniel's request. Now Daniel had the chief of the eunuchs acquiesce to him, the chief steward. He had the Arioch, the king's guard, and now the king himself acquiesced. So this is something which God is obviously allowing to happen. So he went into the house and made the decision known then to his friends, Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the Lord God of heaven concerning the secret. What this really means is that they prayed. They went and they prayed, and they probably prayed earnestly and for some period of time. And then what he did, then he went to bed. He went to bed and slept, and it was revealed to him in a dream. So what it said, the wise men of Babylon had said that only the gods could tell the secret that Nebuchadnezzar wanted told. Only the gods could tell it to the king, no one else. Now Daniel is saying he prayed to to the God of heaven, to the God of the Jewish people, and asked for the interpretation and the dream, and it came to him in a night vision. So Daniel had prayed, his companions had prayed, God answered them in a prayer. And then Daniel praised God, gave thanks and praised God. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever." Pardon me. For wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. When Daniel asked the king for time, he did not do what the soothsayers did, going out and talk among themselves and fret about what was going to happen. He did not look to the stars to find some interpretation of the movement of the stars as the astrologers did. Daniel went and with his companions prayed, and then went to sleep. The vision came to him, and then the first thing he did afterwards was thank God for what God had done in revealing to him the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had and its interpretation. Prayer can do wonders for many people if we only allow it to do that. If we only accept the fact that it works, then it can be a great boon to many people, a great boon to ourselves, as it was to Daniel and his companions. So Daniel now had the idea of the vision and of the interpretation, and then he went to Arioch when the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He said, "Do not destroy the wise men, but take me to the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation." Arioch did this, but he tried to take the credit for it all himself, for he said, "I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will give the king what he wants." And the king asked Daniel what he was going to do, and the king answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret was given to me, not through the magicians or through the astrologers or through the soothsayers or through the Chaldeans, but there is a man, a God in heaven who reveals secrets to men. And he is the one who has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days." So now he goes on to start to describe the dream which Nebuchadnezzar had and how it came to him. But it says, this was not me, but the secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom, or I have more influence, or I have more anything than anybody else. But for our sakes it is made known by God above. It is for our sakes who makes known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your own heart. Daniel's interpretation, which we'll get into in the next lesson, really has to do more with the ability of God, the true God in heaven, to give us answers that we pray for and that we honestly require, more so than just the ordinary answers that otherwise can be given by soothsayers or magicians or Chaldeans or all these other people who pretend to know that they have an influence from above. This is really the basis of this story, because God is the sovereign of all. It is his sovereignty which gives man's ability to do things. And if man is obedient to God, then that sovereignty will come through. Daniel was obedient to God. He was in a foreign country. He was in a foreign land. He had undertaken to learn the culture of that land. He'd undertaken to learn the philosophy of that culture. He'd undertaken to learn the language. He had become involved in that country's culture completely. But even though he came to know it, even though he came to understand it, he did not lose his basic faith in the one true God. And God had apparently put him there for such a time, because his interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream showed how the true God can help and can bring forth interpretations and can bring forth the real meaning of dreams, whereas those other soothsayers and astrologers could not. So this is a way in which the true God showed his superiority over the gods of Babylon, and thereby impressed Nebuchadnezzar and those other people in the court of Nebuchadnezzar about the trueness of the Israeli God. Don't forget, at the very start of this, when Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem, he took the articles of worship, the articles of the temple, he took some of them back to his gods in Babylon, indicating to the people at that time that the Babylonian gods were superior to the God of Israel. Now it's just the reverse. Now we're seeing that the God of Israel is really superior to the gods of Babylon. So Daniel saved his companions and saved the other wise men of Babylon by being able to interpret and give Nebuchadnezzar assurance that he could interpret the dream that he had had. And he was able to do this because God gave it to him after he and his companions prayed and asked for the meaning of what had happened. And the first thing they did afterwards, after they were given the dream, was to praise God and to thank him for what he had done, even before going to the king himself. So we now have Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar together. Daniel is about to give the interpretation of the dream, and it may be an interpretation which you've heard before, but we're going to go through it again next week. And in doing all this, it reveals the future of the world. So this is where we stand. We're going to leave it for today. Next week we'll get into the interpretation of the dream itself and the interpretation of that dream. So thanks again for watching, and I hope that you'll join me next week for the rest of chapter 2. Bye for now.